I'm Alexandra Makin of Early Medieval Embroidery, and today we're going to look at buttonhole stitch. I'm going to run through its use during the early medieval period, and then I'm going to show you an example of how it was worked as well. So buttonhole stitch is sometimes called blanket stitch, but technically the two are slightly different. My understanding is that buttonhole stitch is when the stitches are worked closely together, more for functional purposes to, for example, secure the outline of a buttonhole, as you can see in the image here. My understanding of blanket stitch is that the stitches are worked wider apart, again as you can see in the image, and this is more of a decorative feature, and you sometimes see this on embroideries and on heavier fabrics including blankets, hence its name. All the surviving examples from the early medieval period in England are buttonhole stitch. And it's quite an exciting stitch really, because although it was mainly used as a functional securing stitch, it was used in a decorative way, and that shows you how the embroiderers were thinking creatively as they were working the stitch, even if it's to do something that we would consider to be mundane. So there are 5 known examples of buttonhole stitch that survive from early medieval England, and they date from, we think, the 6th century right the way through to the 10th century. The first comes from Mitchell's Hill, and it appears on the back of wrist clasps, which you can see in the image here. Now, wrist clasps were used to hold cuffs of sleeves together, the precursor to the use of buttons and cufflinks and things like that. Wrist clasps were larger, often decorated beautifully. Sometimes these decorations had metaphorical and other meanings associated with them. And in order for them to work, they were stitched to the textile or the tablet woven band that formed the cuff of the sleeve. What you find is that underneath, on the reverse of the clasps, you often get the remains of the textile, tablet woven band, or sometimes just some of the threads. But we're very lucky with the Mitchell's Hill ones, because you have some surviving textile, as you can see, and securing the edge of that textile is buttonhole stitch. This example is worked in wool. It's now at the Ashmolean Museum, and you can search for it on their online collections database. I've included the link for you below. The next piece is an 8th century piece. It's worked in silk, and it's tablet woven band. It was discovered in St Cuthbert's tomb in Durham. It keeps turning up, and it is part of that tradition of people donating gifts, including textiles, which the stole and maniple are 2, the ones that I've talked about in previous posts, which again I've put in the comments below. And they're earlier. The stole and maniple are slightly later in date. This tablet woven band is edged in buttonhole stitch that's worked, as I said, in silk. We then move on to the 9th century, where another tablet woven band, which was discovered in St Willibrord's Shrine in Utrecht Cathedral, hence it's called the Utrecht Reliquary Pouch, the band was converted into a pouch, and the edges were stitched together with silk, and it worked in buttonhole stitch. The only surviving photograph, this black and white one, again from that Batterscombe volume, that volume that keeps turning up, shows the band. It worked in buttonhole stitch. The only surviving photograph, this black and white one, again from that Batterscombe volume, that volume that keeps turning up, shows the band. It worked in buttonhole stitch. The only surviving photograph, this black and white one, again from that Batterscombe volume, that volume that keeps turning up, this is unfortunately the only surviving example, and nobody knows where the pouch is now located, so I've not been able to see it, but my understanding is that the buttonhole stitch is worked in different colours of silk thread, giving it that extra opulence, but also enabling the silk thread to blend into the pattern woven onto the tablet woven band. So forming a decorative and a functional thing at the same time. We then move on to the 8th/9th century, to a fragment of silk embroidery that was discovered in the Oseberg ship burial in Norway. Now, most of the textiles and embroideries are thought to have come from early medieval England, and this is a fragment that you can see here is one of them. So this is worked in silk. The main design, well, the main surviving design, are 2 roundels that are inhabited by creatures, but the bit we're interested in is along the top of the image, where you can see buttonhole stitch has been used to secure the fabric. And the original report stated that this was worked in a red silk thread. So again, it's using a beautiful thread creatively to add a decorative functional element to the embroidery. And it also suggests that area of the embroidery might have been the edge of the embroidery or part of a band that could have been attached to different clothing. We have lots of documentary evidence for that sort of thing. The final surviving example is a 9th to 10th century piece from Llangorse in Wales, and this very important textile, a lot of it is covered in embroidery, but there are some areas that are quite plain, and on one of these areas are 2 eyelets that have been secured with buttonhole stitch. The thread is Z-spun and it's worked on a ground fabric of linen. While there's no evidence of holes in the layer of fabric beneath the eyelets, through the middle of one of them survives another thread, which suggests that the eyelets weren't actually functional, they were decorative, and that a button or a bead or something along those lines was stitched over the top of them, giving them that extra dimension of decorative functionality, although they were purely decorative motifs. So that's a quick whiz-bang stop of buttonhole stitch in early medieval England and its uses. What I'm going to do now is show you how the buttonhole stitch as it was used in Llangorse was worked. I'm doing that through this embroidery here. This is a sample piece I'm working on for an embroidery book that I'm writing. And you can see that I've created these little buttonholed eyelets on the front of what will be a pouch, and the same on the back. Whilst the Llangorse eyelets are 1 centimetre in diameter or across, these are only 5 millimetres across. It's worked on a wool fabric in broken herringbone weave, and this has been woven for me by my weaver, Elizabeth de Bourne, who I talked about in the last post. She's amazing. I will put her links for you down below. And the eyelets, the buttonhole, is worked in this lovely wool thread from De Vere Yarns, and I'll put their link down below as well. Whilst this is a sample for an embroidery book, I have still been using the handmade needles, as I did for the reconstruction project. Recreation project, and I have been using the handmade scissors that are the same shape and size as those that are found in archaeological excavations, just to add that extra dimension of authenticity and experimental archaeology to the project as well.
To begin with, I marked out the centre points of each eyelet on the fabric. I did this because I wanted them to be a set distance from each other. In 4 places around the dots, I then marked 2.5mm to guide the size of my stitches. To cast on, I stab stitched 3 or 4 tiny stitches around the dots inside the working area. I found it easier to place the first buttonhole stitch by working from the outer edge of the buttonhole circle, and I actually did this with all the stitches. Every time the needle is passed through the centre dot, I hold the loop of thread to keep it taut and line in the direction of work, in this case from left to right. It also stops the loop twisting, so it's easier to position the needle and pull the thread into place. The needle always needs to be taken to the back of the fabric through the same hole in the centre, and the stitches need to be pulled quite tight so the hole widens as the eyelet is worked. This soft wool fabric is perfect for this because the warp and weft threads move easily as the stitches are made. The needle is brought to the front of the fabric approximately 0.5mm to the right of the previous stitch on the outer edge of the eyelet circle. You have to remember to position the embroidery thread so it radiates out from the centre of the hole like the spokes of a wheel. That way the finished embroidery will be evenly spaced. The last stitch is anchored by sliding the thread under the short leg of the first stitch, and that way the beginning and end of the stitching can't be seen. And to cast off the thread, I simply passed it through the stitches on the reverse of the embroidery. I then used a stiletto to widen the hole in the centre more.
So that's how buttonhole stitch is worked for eyelets, and particularly linked to the Llangorse textile. As a reminder, if you've got any questions or comments linked to this or any other posts that you've seen, or if there's a stitch that you would particularly like me to show you how it worked and give a brief history on, then please put that in the comments, and I will work future posts around those suggestions. If you've liked anything within this post, then please like it, because then I know I'm doing something right. And thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!